Hey everyone, welcome to the Cast and Spear podcast. My name is John, and today we have back on the show Mr. California himself, Matt Hoang, who's going to talk about catching and preparing fish because he is the master. He is one of the people in the community who just really sets the trend for all the cool things to do once you catch your fish. So welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks, John, man. That means a lot.
Dude, absolutely. So why do you like this whole preparing fish in certain ways to make sure the meat quality is just epic?
Thanks for asking, dude. This is pretty much the reason why I do this sport. Um, I love eating and I love cooking and I love adventures. So put it all together, I think spearfishing is really beautiful to me because of the fact that I'm catching my own food and I have almost complete control of all the variables involved when it comes to catching and preparing my food, all the way from when it gets out of the ocean or catching it in the ocean and then bringing it all the way to your table. I really enjoy that aspect of spearfishing.
Now, once you do shoot the fish, like the common thing that most guys will do, right, is you got to brain it to, put the fish out of its misery, you bleed it, and then it's kind of, you throw it on some ice, hopefully, and that's the last thing we think about until we get it home. Is there anything else we should be doing, like EKG may, or are we supposed to be keeping the fish cool, like right away? What's the best protocol to keep the meat fresh?
Right on. So the biggest thing for me in terms of preserving the quality of my fish is simply not not eating the fish too soon. Like there's like no greater sin to me than like catching like a 60-pound white sea bass and then going back and then like eating it the same night because it's such a large fish, and when you catch a fish and any animal or being or whatever passes away, I'm sure you're familiar with the process of rigor mortis. So rigor mortis, in case you don't know, is a process of when something dies, the muscles will actually tense up. And so, we can really geek out about that. But, well, okay, so basically it's a process of when something dies, ATP production stops. And ATP is actually what's needed to allow your muscles to relax. So once there's no more ATP, the muscles don't relax and it's just stiff as a board. And when you go home and you eat that fish too fresh, you're going to taste all of that stiffness, this toughness, this rubberiness. And the bigger the fish and the bigger the muscle fibers, the more dramatic this effect is going to be. So for me, the main thing when it comes to making sure that the quality of my food is delicious is to rest the fish. And then second thing is number 2, bleed your fish, please, ladies and gentlemen. If you're a fisherman or a spearo, please do this a big favor. Bleed your fish when you catch it because the heart is still pumping, and so you're going to get rid of all that blood, all that fishiness. And I think that's the main thing that throws people off when it comes to seafood is just like that bloody, metallic, irony, fishy flavor that comes from the blood of the fish. With fish that's improperly cared for, that's going to really throw off the quality of your seafood product.
Now, have you seen a difference when you bleed them right away, so the heart's still pumping, or when you throw it in your game bag and then you bleed it, say when you get back to the dock at the end of the day? Is there a noticeable difference in bloodlines?
I'm so glad you asked that question because 100% there's a huge difference. So this YouTube video that I have coming out, I have a catch and cook thing that I did. I shot a yellowtail down in Baja, and I didn't know until I got back and filleted the fish, but the shaft had actually my shot had actually gone through the fish and out the gill, and it actually punctured the gill membrane and severed the main artery. So as I was fighting the fish, the whole time I was fighting the fish was actually bleeding out like arterially. And so when I took it home onto the table, I filleted this fish, and I was in shock as to how clean and bloodless this fish was. Right? Like I've been spearfishing for years, and I've been catching my fish and trying my best to cut the gills and bleed the fish as soon as possible. And to answer your question, by the way, huge difference. Yes, while the fish is still alive and still pumping, that's when you're going to get the most removal of the blood. So if you wait until the fish is dead in your kill bag and then go home and cut the gills, that blood is all clotted and congealed, and the heart's not pumping, so there's no flow. You're not gonna get the blood out really effectively. So, with that being said, going back to it, it's like you want to bleed the fish as soon as possible. So how I've been doing it previously was, catch the fish, put the knife into the head of the fish, obviously killing it, rendering the brain inoperable, and then cutting the gills. So the heart will actually still pump after you've dispatched the fish. For a few moments, the heart will still be pumping, and you'll get all that blood out. Well, most of the blood. But after this experience down in Baja, I realized that actually cutting the main artery before the fish expires leads to just an immaculate product. So I'm gonna have to think about what's the best balance between humanely catching the fish and then also bleeding out the fish to my best ability, because it seems if you bleed it out before you brain it, that's actually going to be the best result.
Well, we won't tell PETA about you then.
Yeah, right.
And then, so when somebody gets their fish, and we're talking about rigor mortis, I've seen multiple different ways of, like, I know some people hang their fish. We could talk about dry aging in another episode. I know some people like to make like a salty slurry, ice slurry, and they leave it in for a couple of days. Do you have a best practice in terms of, or do you just put it in your fridge and just wait? Like, what's the best course of action?
Yeah. So I'm great. I'm glad you asked that too, because there's so much hoopla when it comes to rigor mortis and preparing seafood. And I can say, when it comes to seafood too, it's like, unlike meat or poultry, seafood is one of those products where how you care for that said particular product is going to dramatically affect your experience eating it, the flavor wise and texture wise, and you could do one wrong thing and you could ruin the whole thing. But basically, what I think people are all attempting to do is two things. So the first thing is they're trying to keep the fish from spoiling, either having the bacteria get into it or having the heat get to it. So the main thing, best practice, is once you catch your fish, get it on ice as soon as possible, and don't be fooled, because a lot of times people think that rigor mortis. Well, hush it. Let's back up for a second. Rigor mortis can take onset on a fish pretty variably based off of the conditions under which the fish was caught. So either if the fish was like struggling a lot just prior to death, or if it was a stone shot and the fish died immediately, that's going to affect how quickly rigor mortis takes effect. So don't be fooled. If you see that the fish has gotten rigor mortis fairly quickly or later on, you're actually not really doing anything bad or different. As long as the fish is cooled down and that you're not growing any bacteria or letting any of the meat spoil, you're doing your job. So just kind of circle back on it. So that's one thing. Is number one, they're trying to keep the fish from spoiling, and number two, they're trying to best kind of preserve the texture of the fish. So that's why people think that it's best to eat the fish right away. In which case I say yes, if you can catch the fish and kill it and cook it before rigor mortis takes place, that's great for texture wise. But once rigor mortis sets in, you don't want to eat the fish. And then secondly, it's okay to wait until after the rigor mortis takes effect. So, how should I say this? Okay. So basically, my best practice in terms, I don't know how to sum it all up. Let me kind of back up. So the second thing is they're trying to keep the fish. Okay, texture. Back to the texture thing. Yeah. So with the ice slurries and the ice baths and the ikejime, all that is kind of an attempt to preserve the texture. But all I can say to that is, as long as you're keeping the fish cool, you can either enjoy the fish before rigor mortis sets in or after rigor mortis sets in. Best practice is just to keep the fish cold and then monitor the muscles kind of state.
And then I think lastly, to kind of wrap up the episode, say we have it, it's past rigor mortis time, we filleted it, we cut out all the bloodlines, we now just have this nice product. How do you know which fish you should be eating raw versus you should sear it versus you should bake it, you should fry it? Did you have kind of like a general rule of thought, like a yellowtail, don't fry it, most of the time you'll mess it up, it'll be too dry? Like, how do you know which fish to do what? Or is it just all experimentation?
That's the fun part of the sport, baby. You can go out and try a bunch of different fish. Like, hey, you look delicious, I want to try you, and try it in multiple ways. That's number one golden rule. There is feel free to experiment with your food. You know, try it raw, try it cooked, and try it poached. Try it a bunch of different ways. But rule of thumb, basically, in regards to food safety too, because safety first, is do your research. You know, do other cultures eat this fish raw? If you find some species in Hawaii, they try not to eat the fish at all because they contain certain toxins like ciguatera or are more likely to have certain parasites. So rule of thumb is research the fish that you caught. And then secondly, you know, feel free to experiment with it and learn your results. But to that effect, what I've seen as a general rule of thumb is most fish that are predatory, for example, like a snapper or yellowtail and yada, 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 those are great to eat cooked. Like I loved eating cooked fish, and most of the fish that we eat are predatory fish. So if it's a predatory fish, feel free. You can probably cook it. Yellowtail often tends to get dry, but I have an answer to that in our, and that'd be dry aging, but we'll talk about that probably in another episode. Yeah, but if it's a predatory fish, feel free to cook it up, and then feel free to also sashimi it if it's, you know, not a species known to carry bacteria and parasites and such.
Perfect. And then a word to the wise, if you're a little bit overweight and you want to lose some weight, make sure you eat some raw fish, get some parasites. It'll take all that weight right out of you, and you'll be fine. All right. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt. Tomorrow we're going to be chatting about dry aging fish, which you don't want to miss. Check out Matt's Instagram, Mr. California, his new YouTube channel, Adventure Eats, and I'll have all of this in the show notes. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.
Hey, one more thing before you go. Do you find yourself watching YouTube as much as I do? I think it's replaced my TV, to be honest. Well, if so, check out the Cast and Spear YouTube channel. We're trying to put up good tips and tricks that we learn as we get better at fishing and spearfishing, and we'd love for you to subscribe and leave a comment. We'll see you there. Bye.